Hi, everyone. I'm Beth Keene, CEO of Holocaust Museum LA. I'm thrilled to welcome all of you to our 5th annual Teicholz Holocaust Remembrance film series. Last year, we held this series and reached over 600 people from around the globe. In the spirit of increasing access to these remarkable and spreading the important lessons of the Holocaust beyond our local community, we are excited to once again offer the Teicholz Holocaust Remembrance film series virtually. This year's series focuses on German Holocaust films, exploring how German cinema has dealt with the complexities of the country's role during the Holocaust. Holocaust Museum LA is the first survivor-founded and oldest Holocaust museum in the United States. We were founded in 1961 by survivors who met at Hollywood High School and wanted to create a safe place to display their precious artifacts, their family members who had perished, and educate future generations on the important lessons of the Holocaust. Today, the museum continues to provide free Holocaust education to students from across Los Angeles, the United States, and the world, fulfilling the mission of our founders to commemorate, educate, and inspire. I'm especially excited to share that the museum officially reopened its doors to the public on July 31st, and we now have USC Shoah Foundation's Dimensions and Testimony program in our permanent exhibit. It's a holographic interactive experience with survivor Renee Firestone, so visitors can hear her testimony and ask her questions that prompt responses in real time. The last film in this year's series is the 1963 East German production of Naked Among Wolves. Joining us today for today's panel discussion about the film are Helga Schreckenberger and Maria Zalewska. Professor Helga Schreckenberger is the chair of the Department of German and Russian at the University of Vermont, where she also previously served as the Director of Women's and Gender Studies. She teaches courses in language, culture, and literature, including courses such as the German short story after 1945, German exile literature, and the legacy of the Holocaust. Professor Schreckenberger's research focuses on 20th century Austrian literature, particularly on post-1945 authors and exile literature. Dr. Maria Zalewska is the executive director of the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial Foundation and has a doctorate in cinema and media studies. Dr. Zalewska received her PhD from USC School of Cinematic Arts, where her research interests included cinematic representations of the Holocaust, place in cinema, and history as film and film as history. As executive director of the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial Foundation, Dr. Zalewska provides operational and strategic leadership for American support of the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial and Museum in Poland. Award-winning journalist and best-selling author Tom Teicholz will moderate the session. Thank you so much, Tom, for bringing the idea of a film series to the museum many years ago, and for your enthusiasm and commitment in curating this year's film series, and for lending us your time and insight as moderator. Thank you also to the Film Library at the University of Massachusetts Amherst for the use of this film, and to the Vendy Museum for their partnership. I also want to thank the Consulate General of the Federal Republic of Germany, Los Angeles, for their generous sponsorship of this year's Teicholz Holocaust Remembrance film series, and the generous donors who have supported this series over the years: the Davidson Hook, YNS Nazarian Family Foundation, Rita and Leo Greenland Family Foundation, and the Richenthal Foundation. Holocaust Museum LA brings you programs like today's at no charge. If you're enjoying our programs, please consider supporting our work by becoming a member. To learn more about our membership levels and benefits, you can visit our website at holocaustmuseumla.org/membership. And without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Tom and our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. I am so, blown away by the more than 200 people who are online to listen to our discussion. This is the 5th year of our Holocaust Remembrance film series, and it's really amazing how it's grown and how many of you have supported us, both the foundations and the consulates and institutions that Beth mentioned, and also the individuals like yourselves who like what we're doing and want to support this film series and see it continue. So I thank all of you from the bottom of my heart for doing this. Today's film, Naked Among Wolves, I want to give a little background about before we launch into our discussion. So Naked Among Wolves was first published in 1958 as a novel by Bruno Apitz. As a novel, not a memoir, much as Schindler's Ark was first published as a novel and not a memoir. And it also calls to mind questions that have been raised about about fiction versus nonfiction in the work of such authors as Jerzy Kosinski's The Painted Bird, or even Elie Wiesel's Night. Bruno Apitz was born in Leipzig. He was not Jewish. As a young man, he became a Communist Party member and was jailed by the Germans for his Communist Party activity. And once the Nazis took power, he was imprisoned for the crime of spreading socialism and being an active Communist Party member. From 1937 to 1945, he was imprisoned at Buchenwald, and beginning in 1945, after liberation, he began to work for DEFA, the film organization that made the film that we're watching tonight. And Apitz was also, in the 1950s, a tour guide at Buchenwald, where he had been a prisoner and where this fought. Apitz had heard the story of the boy who was hidden at Buchenwald, but did not see him himself. However, many of the facts of the boy's story turned out to be true. In the novel, the boy is called Stefan Ciliak, but in real life, it was discovered that the boy was Stefan Yeshesh Zweig. Now, Stefan Yeshesh Zweig was born in Krakow in 1941, and he lived in the Krakow ghetto with his parents and his sister. His family was separated by the Nazis, and his mother and sister were sent to Auschwitz, deported to Auschwitz, where they were murdered. His father and he were sent to Buchenwald. And Stefan Yeshesh was indeed, as the story in this movie, separated from his father and hidden until liberation. And after liberation, after a certain time, he was reunited with his father. This story, Bruno Apitz's novel, first became a TV movie in Germany in 1960. In 1963, it was made again as the movie that we have watched, if you have watched or are going to watch, Naked Among Wolves, 1963 version, which was directed by Frank Bayer, one of the top DEFA directors, and who also directed the first film that we showed in this series, Jacob the Liar. After this film came out, and it premiered in Moscow, which gives you a sense of East Germans being under the Soviet influence. It premiered in Moscow, and two people who saw the movie then came forward to say that it was based on a true story. And then journalists found Stefan Jerzy Zweig and Apitz and Willy Bleicher, who in fact was the person among the two people who helped hide and save Zweig at Buchenwald, were reunited in 1964 and actually were reunited at Buchenwald on that occasion. Zweig, who was a young man by that time, was there given the opportunity to become a cameraman and learn a cinematographer at the Babelberg studio in Germany, and that in fact became his lifetime profession as a cameraman. Now, I just will mention two other pieces of sort of interesting trivia. The two people who saved Zweig were Willy Bleicher, who was a political prisoner, who was a trade union leader and became quite well known in post-war East Germany as a trade union leader. And the other was Robert, let me just look closely, Seifert, who himself became a German politician who was well known. Now, there is one little matter of controversy, which we will touch upon a little bit later, which is that it also came out eventually that the manner in which they were able to save Zweig was that his name, shortly after he arrived at Buchenwald, his name appeared on a list of people to be rounded up to be sent to Auschwitz. And Bleicher and the other gentleman swapped his name for that of another young man, a 16-year-old boy named Willy Blum, who was a Roma, a gypsy, and Blum was deported and to Auschwitz and murdered there. And so this, of course, Zweig was not aware of it at the time, and of course, nobody really knew who was going to live and who was going to die, either at Buchenwald or at Auschwitz. But it is a fact that came out and that created some controversy at the time. Let me now, having given you this long introduction, begin by first turning to Dr. Zalewska and asking you to tell us a little bit about Buchenwald and how that's different from Auschwitz, Birkenau, which we might be more familiar.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tom, for bringing us together tonight and for being our moderator. Let me just begin by acknowledging the organizers of tonight's panel. And I would like to thank Beth Keane for hosting us tonight and for her kind introductions. And it's such a pleasure, Professor Schreckenberger, to talk with you tonight. Now, Tom, going back to your question, you want me to talk a little bit about Buchenwald concentration camp, where the movie Naked Among the Wolves was shot. And in particular, how it's different from the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration and extermination camp. And the movie establishes a connection between these two camps from the very beginning. The 3-year-old Jewish boy who survived, we're told that he survived the Warsaw Ghetto, is saved by a Polish man from Warsaw, whose name indicates he's a non-Jewish Pole, Zbigniew Jankowski. We don't get any information about the boy's survival in Auschwitz, but as the little boy arrives in Buchenwald in a suitcase, we instantly know that this survival is nothing short of a miracle. And it's clear that the boy and the man just survived one of the death marches. This movie is set in Germany in early spring of 1945. So just weeks after the Soviet forces approached Auschwitz, and SS began evacuating Auschwitz and its subcamps. So that's the connection that we get from the very beginning of the movie. Auschwitz is not really mentioned later on in the movie. But considering the differences between these two places, before considering the differences, let me just pause for a moment and acknowledge what these two places had in common. Both Buchenwald and Auschwitz Birkenau were designed, built and operated by Nazi Germans, and both of these places, men, women, and children suffered, died, were killed. And both of these camps were part of an extensive, huge network of over 44,000 camps and other incarceration sites, including the ghettos that were established in both Germany and Nazi-occupied lands in Eastern Europe by Nazi Germany since the beginning of Hitler's rise to power, 1933, until the end of World War II. So this is what these places had in common. Now, thinking about the differences, there are many different ways to approach this question. We can talk about the difference of location, for example. Buchenwald was set up by the Nazis in the middle of Germany, sort of southwest of Berlin, near the city of Weimar. Auschwitz-Birkenau, on the other hand, was set up by the Nazis in Nazi-occupied Poland between cities of Krakow and Katowice. If you look at the map of German-occupied Europe, you'll see that Auschwitz was very sort of centrally located. We can think about the difference between these two camps in terms of its history and structure, and the types of prisoners who were there from the beginning. So Buchenwald was established really early. I mean, before even World War II started, it was established in 1937. And just as was the case with other concentration camps, it had the typical sort of design. The area was surrounded by an electrified barbed wire fence, watchtowers, things that we see in the movie. And inside the camp, indeed, there was a notorious punishment block that is featured in the movie where André Höfel and Kropinski are held and tortured, and that was called the bunker. So that is truly part of the design of the camp. When it came to the prisoner population of Buchenwald, most of the early inmates were Germans, German political prisoners, people who were arrested by the Nazi regime for some form of political opposition to the Nazi rule. For example, communists who are featured in this movie. There were also Jewish prisoners in Buchenwald, which is not really discussed in the movie, and I'm sure we will talk about why. But it's important to mention that indeed there were Jewish prisoners in Buchenwald. Particularly, there was after Kristallnacht in 1938. There were transports of Jewish prisoners to Buchenwald. They were subjected to extraordinary cruel treatment. There were also other groups of prisoners like Jehovah's Witnesses, Sinti and Roma, etc. Now, when it comes to Auschwitz, the history is a little bit more complex. There was Auschwitz I and there was Auschwitz II, also known as Auschwitz-Birkenau. There was also Auschwitz III, Monowitz, but for the purpose of keeping my answer short, let me just note that there was Auschwitz III. Auschwitz I was a concentration camp originally established in 1940 in the beginning of World War II. Some of the first prisoners that arrived in Auschwitz I were Polish prisoners. One of the main first transports of the Polish prisoners consisted of members of the Polish underground, students, but also a small group of Polish Jews. And Auschwitz I served a similar purpose to Buchenwald, to incarcerate real and perceived enemies of the Nazi regime, to provide a supply of laborers, of forced laborers, to be deployed to factories and later to be forced to provide war-related production. And three, Auschwitz I also served as a site to kill targeted small groups of the population whose death was determined by the SS to be essential. Now, Auschwitz II, Auschwitz-Birkenau, was the extermination center. Located 2 miles from Auschwitz I. And that is where the greatest difference between Buchenwald and Birkenau is. There's a difference in function and of sort of purpose. Buchenwald was a concentration camp. Auschwitz-Birkenau was both. It was a concentration camp and an extermination camp. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? It means that between 80 and 90% of people who arrived in Birkenau never became prisoners. Never got their prisoner numbers, never got their uniforms, never got their tattoos, never were registered because they were not meant to be in the camp. They were sent straight to the gas chambers where they were exterminated. Because the purpose, the design was, Birkenau was an extermination center. It's estimated that over 1.3 million people were deported to Auschwitz, and approximately 1.1 million people were murdered, and most of them were Jewish. But other groups killed in Auschwitz-Birkenau included non-Jewish Poles, Roma Sinti, Soviet prisoners of war, and others. So that is the main difference.
Great. Thank you so much. You bring up an interesting point, which is that when we see this movie, there really is no real mention of Jews. We are to assume the boy is Jewish because they say that he was in the Warsaw Ghetto, and that's sort of a tip-off. But mostly we see this movie as a story of the struggle of communists against the Nazis. And I wanted to ask you, Dr. Streckenberger, to talk about this, the attitude of the East German government and this and the way in which this story is told. It made me think a little bit of Ilya Ehrenberg and Vasily Grossman writing the Black Book of testimonies of Holocaust survivors, which was never published because the Soviets felt that it only described Jewish murders of Jews, and the Soviet system was more interested in murders of Soviet citizens.
Yes, thank you for that question. And also I would like to start by thanking Pat Keen and the Holocaust Museum to including me on that panel. It's really a great pleasure to be included in that discussion. So the East German government, which was mainly made up of exiles returning from the Soviet Union, who themselves had been persecuted by the Nazis because they were communists, took a very different approach to dealing with the legacy of the Nazi period and the Holocaust. They defined fascism strictly in Marxist, that is, economic terms. So the German capitalists brought Hitler to power in order to prevent victory of the communists. And that made the communists the foremost target of the Nazis, not the Jewish population. And we see that in the film, as you already mentioned. For the Marxists, well, that explanation or that definition completely ignores the centrality of the racists, specifically the anti-Semitic, that those two ideologies were central to the Nazi ideology. For the Marxists, anti-Semitism was caused by manipulation from above to distract the masses from being aware of the abuses of the exploitative system that they were living under. Mm-hmm. So by defining themselves as an anti-fascist state, and with that definition of fascism, the East German government could claim that by breaking with capitalism, they also broke with fascism, and therefore they broke with the German past. And by contrast, they could point to West Germany and saying by keeping the capitalist system in place, they were also continuing fascism. For the memory culture in East Germany, that meant that there was a hierarchy in victims. So there was the active fighter against fascism, and there was the victim of fascism. And the Jewish victims were mostly relegated to the passive victims. This meant that their specific experience was devalued by not admitting or by denying the racist base for their persecution. Their specific Jewish experience was actually excluded from the public discourse. On the other hand, the East German government was very strict about punishing Nazi criminals. And also a lot of former Nazis moved to the West. So that also gave the East German government the justification to point to West Germany and say, here, see, they're continuing, they're just harboring all the Nazi criminals, and they continue to be a threat to world peace.
And we noticed that actually DEFA made more films about the Holocaust in East Germany before, many more than West Germany made, and didn't really want to touch the subject the same way.
Yes, that is correct. But it also changed. At the beginning, East Germany was much more open to admitting Jewish victimhood with the early films like Ehe in Schatten or The Fall Blum. But then with the Cold War and with the greater influence of Stalinism, the Jewish question really became one of sort of being, the Jewish people were not even, were more a casualty and not the foremost target of the Nazis.
I wanted to ask both of you about what did you think of the portrayal of the Nazis in this movie? Because it struck me that at some level, this is a movie about survival. And everyone, including the Nazis, are trying to manipulate the situation to figure out how best to survive, to the end or the end. And with the exception of the one Hauptmannführer who leads the torture and pursues it, the other Nazis are kind of ineffectual in some way, in the way they're portrayed. Let me start with you, Maria. Did you action?
Yeah, can I just add one thing to this question of this movie? The question whether this movie is truly a movie about the Holocaust or whether it's a movie about, whether it's an East German anti-fascist movie, right? Because I think that that's sort of what we're discussing, and I agree that if you didn't know much about the Holocaust or World War II and you watched this movie, you would think that German communists, to be exact, were the greatest victims of Hitler. It's not Jews who are seen to suffer, but Germans for a Jewish boy. That's sort of the paradox here, right? And it's this. The resistance and victimhood are within the German communists. But I think, thinking about it, I also tie it to this notion of playing down the notion of Jewish suffering. I tie it to the Soviet Union's relationship to anti-Semitism, and the sort of, for both geopolitical and ideological reasons, Soviet propaganda throughout the Cold War displayed forms of popular anti-Semitism in sort of periodic pendulum swings. And, such was the case after the Arab-Israeli War of 48 or after the Six-Day War of 67, when was a lot of anti-Semitism in Eastern Europe, and anti-Zionist attitude, and which was followed by purges of the Jewish party members in both the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. So I think that also there was this, and we obviously don't have enough time, but there was a question of anti-Semitism also trickling down through the party and through the sort of party propaganda. But to answer this question, it's an interesting question of this sort of how ordinary the Nazis are in this movie. And I guess I would flip it and I would pose a question back. What does it mean to show Nazis as ordinary? I don't know, weak, or at least not scary as we are used to. and dare I say human, right? It's almost, to me, I mean, I'm thinking about two things. One is the sort of the banality of evil phrase coined, right, of Hannah Arendt. We all know it, and this notion that the Nazis were, that the evil acts were not necessarily perpetrated by evil people, but ordinary people. And what does that mean? To me, as a Holocaust educator, I think it's crucial to humanize the perpetrator. And what do I mean by that? You know, only when we remember that the perpetrators of the Holocaust were human, not some aliens, not people that fell from the sky, but humans who made decisions like us, who had families like us, who prioritized certain things and made choices, do we begin to comprehend that the Holocaust, and when I use the phrase fall from the sky, I paraphrase survivor Marian Tursky's speech when he said Auschwitz didn't fall from the sky. And I think that, you know, that's what I
think that's a good point. I think that's a very good point. Helga, do you want to add anything?
Well, what Maria just said was also raised by Yehuda Bauer in his article, Is the Holocaust Explicable? He says, you know, only if we humanize the Nazis can we understand what happened. Because if I can admit to myself that I also am, I can understand what is going on in that person, then we can see that the Holocaust is created by human and hasn't, as you said, dropped from the sky. So yes, I agree with you very much. I also see it as we can see, most of the Nazis are very opportunistic and do not act out of conviction, except for that one ideologue that you have there. So they are also contrast. They are also building a contrast to the very committed resistance fighters who stand up for their values. And there you have this bunch of opportunists who are only out to get advantage for themselves. So I think that's also part of why they are not as evil as we sometimes know them from Hollywood productions.
Yeah, that's also very. Similarly, I was also struck by the portrayal of the capos, which, you know, often is a taboo subject. This notion of the, in most accounts, the Jews chosen to be in charge of the other Jews, who could sometimes be as cruel, or in some accounts crueler, than the Nazis. And here in this movie, we see them, the capos, by the way, one of whom, Andreas, played by the great actor Armin Mueller-Stahl in a very early performance. You know, we see them making calculations, making decisions about life versus their future attempt at resistance. And I thought that they were treated with a great deal of empathy, actually, which I found surprising. Helga, did you have any reaction?
Well, I thought it was very interesting, the scene where not the capo himself, but the camp oldest sort of poses the question, so who do we save? Do we save the child? And that led to the death of now I can't think his name, one of the inmates who dies because he will not give up the name of the people who hit the child. Or do we not save the child? Do we have the child killed by the Nazis and then save the other person? So who do we save? What is the right question? Tell me what the right answer is. And this conflict of, you know, whatever we do, it's such a difficult decision, and it will yield nothing. There is no right answer. There is no reason for why I should save this person and not this person. But then, you know, go with the innocent child and save the child as the right answer, which then still is not the right answer because it leads to the death of a very beloved comrade. So I thought that was a very moving scene in the movie.
Yeah, Maria, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what Helga just mentioned as this, the setup of the movie to not only humanize but emphasize the morality and in a sense superiority of the communists, because the appearance of the child in Buchenwald activates or in a sense reveals the inner conflicts within all of the main characters, all of them being communists. They are tested, their humanity is tested, their morality is tested. How much of a human is left in you, right? As the war ends, as you feel the end of the war, the moment is of such importance. Would you risk your life at a time when you can almost feel the freedom? And so the question is, have you resisted the fascist oppression? Have you resisted? How much of a human is left in you? So the focus here is again on the sort of communist German psyche, not on the problem of perpetrating cruelty or what of really the life in the camp. But so I think that would be my answer.
Now this movie was released in 1963, and it struck me that in 1961 there was the Eichmann trial, and I wondered whether that trial had an impact Germany and East Germany, such that it created the interest or the space to make such a movie, and whether this movie, once made, created an opening for other movies to follow. Do you have any sense of that, Helga?
That's a very good question. I know that the particular movie couldn't be made until 63. I think Apitz actually wanted it to be a movie and it couldn't be made, so he wrote the novel. So I think there was maybe a very small window around the Eichmann trials to make a movie like that. But it doesn't really stray off very far from the official narrative of the Holocaust. It still, it still focuses very much on the communist resistance. There is maybe one little thing, because the character that is played by Armin Mueller-Stahl, he doesn't obey the party line. He is being told, get rid of the child, get the child out, and he doesn't. He doesn't fall in line with the order from above. And if you connect that to Eichmann, who says, "Oh, I just followed orders. I just did my job. That's all I did." I mean, maybe I'm making too much.
Oh, that's a connection. Brilliant.
Yeah. But I you could see that this was possible maybe within the proximity of the Eichmann trials.
Mm-hmm. Maria?
I can just add, it was the height of the Cold War. It was also right after the Berlin Wall was built. I don't know much about the East German reaction to the Eichmann trials, but I know that it made a big impact on West German audiences. I remember reading about the effect of the trials, and then also the Frankfurt Auschwitz trials, 63, 65, and how they triggered a public debate about the atrocities committed by the Nazis on an unprecedented scale in Germany. And it was the time when this younger generation of Germans born during World War II some of them heard about the atrocities for the first time. And this was a sort of moment of rebellion against the parents' generation for its involvement in the Third Reich policies, and for this sort of collective, I don't know, amnesia, not talking about it right after World War II, as part of the Stunde Null in West Germany, and sort of, you know, moving on. And that generation, cinematically, you know, that's my interest. So for that generation included Rainer Fassbinder, Werner Herzog, Volker Schlöndorff, Wim Wenders, and Günter Grass, and sort of that was the moment of this sort of generational switch and reaction.
Well, we're going to go to questions in a couple of minutes, but two things I was curious about. One is, even though in this film we have the child being such a surprise and a cherished item almost, I believe that at Buchenwald there was actually a children's barrack, because I believe that at the end of the war, Elie Wiesel was in a children's barrack 66 at Buchenwald. I don't know if either of you know about that, but
yeah, there was, with Block 66, the children's barrack in Buchenwald. I don't know much about this, but it's correct. It was Block 66. Yes.
Yeah. So maybe it was, that there were no children among the political prisoners or something like that. I didn't know, but I thought it was interesting. And then I wanted to also ask about, this, as the film makes clear there, and as Helga pointed out, there was a price to be paid for saving this child. And in the real life, in the real story, there was a price to be paid for that Willy Bloom was switched for Jesche Zweig, and one life saved but another lost. How do you feel about how that was sort of handled in the film in that issue? If you have any reactions about that, both the true story and the fictional one. Helga, I see you.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really mention anything about Willy, the young
Right.
young man who was substituted for the
Though they do make a point of Jankowski being.
Yeah, so they do have, I mean, they do admit that they have sort of the power to choose who gets sent away.
Right.
So maybe that but didn't you say it was discovered after the film?
Yes, it was discovered.
Yeah.
It was revealed after the film.
Yeah.
And and Apitz actually didn't know. I mean, he only heard the story secondhand himself. So it is amazing how nonetheless he got it right in a way.
Yeah. So I mean, they did have a control over some things. For example, who will get sent on and who can stay, and I think that was shown in the film. But as you said, since Apitz himself even didn't know that this had happened, so I don't think the film makes a conscious reference to that event.
Maria, anything you'd like to add to that? No? Okay.
No.
So I'm going to now, let's see, in our questions, we have, did his father know he was protected in Buchenwald, and did he survive? The short answer is that I don't know if the father knew that he was protected, but they were reunited after the war. That I do know. Do either of you have anything to add for that?
No, I don't know, but there is a book by Bill Neven on the whole story. So there might be, I can't recall if he mentions that. If the father knew about his protection, but I don't know.
And I think Zweig eventually wrote his own memoir.
Yeah.
As the way of our modern, everyone gets to write a memoir. So I think I know he wrote a memoir as well. Here's a question: this discussion of communists downplaying Jewish suffering is ironically timed this evening. Today, August 12th, is the anniversary of the Night of the Murdered Poets in the Soviet Union in 1952. I suppose they want us to comment on that. I would just say simply that that the anti-Semitism in the Union is fairly well known. And certainly during Stalin's era, was carried out extensively. Let's see. Let me pull up some other questions that we have here. There's some more comments. Also in the Barrack 66 with Elie Wiesel was Rabbi Lau, who became the chief rabbi of Israel, who was the survivor of Buchenwald at 12 years old. Yes, and there's actually a fabulous story about how these children were taken to France and were like wild animals. And this wonderful woman who was their teacher, who sort of helped them become human again. The Children of Willensdorf, I believe it is the book about it, and I highly recommend that for anyone. Let's see, what else do we have here? You know what? I am going to just leave it so that at this point, if I'm going to turn to each of you and allow you to make some concluding remarks, if you'd like, about the film and about the East German cinema and what is shown in Naked Among Wolves. I'll let you go first, Maria.
Sure. Maybe I can conclude by providing a few general statements about the role of cinema during the Cold War. Right. From the end of between 45 and 89, in all of Central and Eastern European satellite states, cinematic art, but as well as other forms of cultural expression were intrinsically linked to the rhetoric of Moscow's political project of communization. And arts in their institutionalized form, in most cases, depended on state funding. So that's why, when we are talking about collective memory, when we're talking about the way of portraying something in cinema, this notion of getting funding, getting something approved, and that link to ideology, that's where it is. So when we're talking about the development of East German Holocaust discourse, we must consider, when appropriate, the relationship also to the communist policies in the region, and that's what I wanted to add.
And Helga, any final thoughts?
Well, what struck me about the movie, as I mentioned, I found it very much following party line, and also, the focus on the resistance fighter, and the Jewish presence is this innocent child, and representing again what I mentioned before, the passive victim of Nazi persecution. And as you also remember in the film, the child becomes a means to reveal the leadership. The Nazis are not so much interested in finding the child. They just are using the child in order to uncover who are the leaders of the resistance group. So in that sense, the movie followed very much the party line. But, and Maria has already mentioned that, they did a tremendous job in humanizing the protagonists. I mean, even the communist resistance fighters admit to being afraid. And that I found amazing, that you have, they are fearing that they will not hold up under Nazi torture. They are fearing that they will be killed at the end of the war. The oldest said, I want to live. I want to know if it's all worthwhile what we have done. So I feel that even though they are the big heroes, they are shown as the heroes, they are also very, very human in being afraid and not wanting to die. So that sort of struck me as unusual for that time.
And I believe that at the end of Buchenwald, there were 20,000 prisoners who survived, of which only 4,000 were Jewish at Buchenwald. But I think when I watched the movie, of course, I felt that yes, there was an element, and that we could understand what Jews were suffering at Buchenwald and at other camps by seeing the sort of the dynamics of the way in which the Nazis forced people to turn against each other, the constant appels with the taking the hat on and the taking the hat off. And I thought it was a very good window into the process of dehumanization, contrasted with this little child who almost could be a doll, doesn't really talk, sleeps most of the time, but who is the symbol of them rediscovering their humanity and their humaneness throughout the movie, and surviving with this child to the very moment of liberation and their moment of finally resisting the Nazis. So I thought, it was a quite a successful film on that level.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, it's interesting because when we're talking about the Holocaust and the cinema, we often think about this project of remembrance. But again, I think in this movie, it's so much more about the pragmatic focus of the GDR's film production, building and instilling the socialist identity in the audience, and building this opposition to the other, which in that case is the Nazi West German, right? I mean, through the translation of the movie. And so in other words, I think there is a meta theme, and it's, as I said before, it's not really a Holocaust movie, it's an anti-fascist movie.
Right, which is a different perspective on this story, which is why I think it's so great to see it and talk about it as we did this evening. So with that, I want to thank my fellow panelists, Berger and Dr. Zalewski. Really great. I learned a lot, and I hope our audience also learned a lot. And I thank you for participating. And with that, I thank all of you for watching and for being part of this year's Teicholz Holocaust Remembrance film series. And if you like this film series, please support it so we can continue to do it next year when we look forward to rejoining, seeing you and seeing more of the films of this time. Again, thanks, Helga. Thanks, Maria. And good night to all.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.